Get out of my face, kid. You don't belong in first class. Take your ticket and go back where you belong.
I have a first-class ticket, sir. This is my seat.
Nonsense. Move it.
No, I won't move. Check my ticket. Keep sitting in my seat, sir. In a few seconds, you'll understand exactly whose daughter you just humiliated.
The jet bridge stretched ahead of her like a long, narrow promise, and Zara Coleman walked it with the unhurried confidence of someone who had done this exact thing 22 times already this year. She was 14 years old, 5 feet tall, dressed in a charcoal cashmere hoodie and slim, dark trousers, a single carry-on bag slung over one shoulder. Her hair was pulled back into a neat bun, her face calm and open. She did not look like someone who belonged in first class. That was, of course, the whole point of appearances. Flight 212 to London was scheduled to depart John F. Kennedy International Airport at 9:45 in the morning. Zara had arrived early, as she always did, because efficiency was a value her father had pressed into her before she could ride a bicycle. She moved down the aisle of the forward cabin with the ease of long familiarity, her eyes scanning the row numbers. 2A was a window seat, port side, the one she always requested. She had been looking forward to the light over the Atlantic in the early afternoon hours. She had a book she intended to finish. She found her row and stopped. A man was sitting in her seat. He was broad across the shoulders, somewhere in his late 50s, with the thick, self-satisfied build of someone who had spent decades in boardrooms where his word was rarely questioned. His suit was expensive and slightly too tight at the collar. His thinning silver hair was combed back with care. He had spread himself across both the window seat and the aisle seat beside it, his briefcase open on the tray table, a copy of the Wall Street Journal folded under his arm. He was scrolling through his phone with his thumb moving fast, his face set in the particular expression of a man who considered every moment not spent closing a deal to be a minor catastrophe. He did not. Zara stood at the end of the row. She set her carry-on in the overhead bin with quiet efficiency and then addressed him in a voice that was clear and measured and carried just enough volume to be heard over the ambient hum of the cabin. "Excuse me, sir. I believe that is my seat." He did not look up. His thumb kept moving. "Sir," she said it again. Single syllable, patient and precise. This time he looked up. His eyes did a quick automatic sweep. Young girl, dark skin, alone, small. His expression did not change except for a faint tightening around the jaw that suggested annoyance at being interrupted. "Wrong row, kid," he said, and looked back at his phone. "Economy starts about 30 rows back. You'll want to keep moving." The words fell into the recycled air of the cabin like stones into water, and the ripples were immediate. A woman 2 rows ahead lowered her magazine. A couple across the aisle exchanged a glance. A young man behind Zara, mid-20s with a laptop bag, went completely still. Zara did not move. She reached into the front pocket of her bag and produced her boarding pass. She held it out at eye level, parallel to the floor, the print facing him. Seat 2A, Coleman, Z. The ink was clean and black and entirely unambiguous. "My boarding pass says seat 2A, she said. "I booked this seat 4 weeks ago. I would appreciate it if you would check yours and then move your belongings so I can sit down." He glanced at the paper the way someone glances at an obstacle on a sidewalk, before stepping around it, not to read it, only to dismiss it. Then he set his phone face down on the armrest between them, turned his full attention to her for the first time, and delivered his response with a slow, deliberate patience that was not patience at all, but something far colder. "Let me explain something to you, sweetheart," he said, his voice dropping into the register of a man accustomed to managing people he considered beneath him. "This is my seat. It has been my seat since I booked it 9 weeks ago. Whatever you've got printed on that paper, the system made an error, and I suggest you go find a flight attendant and let the adults sort it out now." He picked his phone back up. "I'm busy." The woman with the magazine had stopped pretending to read. The young man behind Zara had his phone angled in a way that was no longer casual. From 2 rows forward, a woman in a tailored blazer was watching with her eyebrows drawn together, her expression very still and very controlled. The way a person looks when they are working very hard not to say something out loud. Zara lowered her boarding pass. She did not fold it, she did not put it away. She held it at her side, fingers wrapped around it with quiet steadiness, and she looked at the man in her seat with an expression that gave nothing away. She had been here before. Not on this plane, not with this man, but in this specific geometry of the world where someone looked at her and saw only the surface of things. She had been 7 years old the first time. She had been 11. She had been 13 every time. Her father had said the same thing afterward. He had said it so many times it had become less a lesson and more a reflex. The most powerful person in the room is the one who does not need to raise her voice. She stood in the aisle of Flight 212, her boarding pass in her hand, her bag in the overhead compartment above her rightful seat, and she did not raise her voice. She did not move toward the back of the plane. She waited with the patience of someone who understood exactly what was coming next. To understand what was about to happen, you had to understand who Zara Coleman actually was, not who she appeared to be, standing in the aisle with her cashmere hoodie and her neat bun and her quiet, unhurried expression. Not the girl that Dale Whitmore had assessed in under 3 seconds and filed under irrelevant. The real Zara Coleman, the one whose life most people in that cabin could not have imagined. She was 14 years old. She spoke 4 languages: English, French, Mandarin, and Portuguese. She was enrolled in an accelerated academic program at a university in London, one of only 6 students under the age of 16 to be admitted in its 112-year history. She had been sitting in first class since she was 3 because her father had been flying her across the Atlantic since before she could read, and she had never once sat anywhere else. This was her 22nd transatlantic flight this calendar year. She had stopped counting around her 12th. On her left wrist, barely visible under the cuff of her hoodie, was a platinum watch. Not the kind sold in airport boutiques or department stores. The kind made by hand in a small workshop in Geneva by 2 craftsmen who took on 3 clients per year and had a 5-year waiting list. It had been a gift from the CEO of a technology company that had once sought her father's guidance during a critical restructuring. The CEO had sent it in a handwritten note that said, simply, for the daughter of the man who saved the company. The watch was worth more than most cars. Dale Whitmore had not noticed it. Most people never did. Marcus Coleman had built Coleman Freight and Logistics from a single leased warehouse in Newark, New Jersey, when he was 29 years old. He had grown up watching his father be turned away from job after job because of the color of his skin, and he had made a decision early on that no system would define the ceiling of his ambition. He worked for 11 years before taking a single salary. He slept on a cot in the office through the first winter because he could not afford rent and operating costs simultaneously. By the time Zara was born, the company had operations on 4 continents. By the time she was 10, it was valued at $6 billion. Today, Coleman Freight and Logistics was an $18 billion enterprise with freight corridors on every continent, air charter partnerships across 3 dozen countries, and a workforce of more than 40,000 people worldwide. Marcus Coleman's face had appeared on the covers of Forbes, Bloomberg Businessweek, and The Economist. He had testified before Congress on supply chain infrastructure. He had been appointed to 2 presidential advisory boards. He did not talk about his wealth the way some men do, as a scorecard or a trophy. He talked about it the way someone talks about a tool, carefully, purposefully, with respect for what it could do and sober awareness of how easily it could be misused. He had raised Zara with the same philosophy. She had sat in on strategy meetings since she was 9, not as a guest but as a participant, listening and eventually contributing. At 10, she had identified an inefficiency in the company's West African routing that saved $4 million annually. At 12, she had co-designed a scholarship program that now funded university education for 120 students per year in underserved communities across 5 states. She did not broadcast any of this. It was simply how she spent her time. To the undiscerning eye, on a Tuesday morning in the forward cabin of a commercial aircraft, she was a black girl traveling alone. Young, small, unremarkable. The kind of person a certain type of man instinctively categorized as someone who could be moved aside without consequence. Dale Whitmore was that type of man. He was a senior vice president at Hargrove Capital, a mid-sized private equity firm based in Midtown Manhattan. He had been in finance for 31 years, long enough to develop the settled, impenetrable arrogance of someone who had never been seriously wrong in front of an audience. He flew first class on company expense and had held platinum status with the airline for 7 consecutive years. He believed, not consciously, but in the deep, unexamined way that certain beliefs are held, that his presence in the forward cabin was an expression of natural order. People like him belonged here. Other people did not. He had not looked at Zara's boarding pass. He had not needed to. He had looked at Zara and reached a conclusion, and conclusions were not things he revisited. Back in the aisle, the real Zara Coleman stood with her boarding pass held at her side, and waited with the patience that came from knowing something the man in her seat did not yet know. That things were about to change, not because she was afraid, not because she was uncertain, but because she had learned, from the best teacher she knew, exactly what to do when someone underestimated her. She had been taught to wait until the moment was right, and she was very good at waiting. The flight attendant arrived 4 minutes after the incident began. Her name tag read Carol, and she moved through the forward cabin with the particular efficiency of someone who had worked the same job for 22 years and had learned, somewhere in those 2 decades, to read the temperature of a situation before she walked into it. She read this one. She took in the standing black girl and the seated white man and the ring of watching passengers, and something in her posture, something almost imperceptible, shifted toward a conclusion before she had spoken a single word. "Is everything all right up here?" she asked, and her eyes went to Zara, not to the man who had refused to move, not to the man who had told a 14-year-old child to go back to economy. Her eyes went to the girl standing in the aisle, and her tone was the particular variety of professional concern that was not concern at all, but preemptive management. Zara recognized it immediately. She had seen it before. She held up her boarding pass without being asked. "I have the window seat," she said. "This gentleman is sitting in it and has declined to move." Carol took the boarding pass. She examined it carefully, her eyes moving back and forth across the paper with the focused scrutiny of someone searching for a flaw. The paper was perfect. The seat number was clear. The name was clear. The flight information was correct in every detail. Carol handed it back and turned to the man with a smile so practiced it had no texture. "Sir," she said, her voice warm and apologetic in a way that was almost an answer in itself, "could I take a look at your boarding pass?" Whitmore waved a hand without looking up. "I'm a platinum member. I booked this seat months ago. Whatever the problem is, it's a system error on their end." He gestured toward Zara with his chin, a small, contemptuous motion. Carol did not press him for the pass. She nodded as though this were a reasonable explanation. "Of course," she said. She looked at Zara with an expression of practiced sympathy, the kind that was designed to feel like consideration but functioned as a soft wall. "We do have some availability in the forward cabin. Row 6 has an open middle seat. I can upgrade you to that, and we'll get you settled in right away." The silence that followed lasted approximately 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, the woman in the tailored blazer set down her drink. The young man with the phone went completely still. An older black man in the 4th row, who had been reading since the plane boarded, looked up from his book for the first time. Zara looked at Carol. She looked at her the way someone looks at a math problem that has been solved incorrectly, with calm certainty and without heat. "I have a confirmed reservation for seat 2A, she said. "Row 6, middle, is not that seat. I'm not interested in a different seat. I would like the seat I booked." Carol's smile tightened fractionally. "I understand your frustration. I'm not frustrated," Zara said. It was true. Her voice was entirely level. "I simply want what I paid for. This is my seat. That gentleman has not produced documentation showing it is his. I would like him to move so I can sit down." Whitmore finally set down his phone. He looked at Zara with the expression of a man who has just realized that the annoyance is not going to resolve itself. There was something new in his face now, something harder than irritation. It was the look of a man who had told someone to disappear and found them still standing there. "Listen," he said, and his voice had dropped into a lower register, the kind that was meant to sound reasonable and functioned as a warning. "I've been flying this airline for 7 years at the platinum level. I've spent more on tickets with this carrier than this kid has probably spent on anything in her entire life. Now, I don't know what kind of mix-up happened, but I suggest someone fix it by finding this girl a seat that isn't mine. Diane Wells, the woman in the tailored blazer, made a sound. It was short, controlled, but audible. She looked at Whitmore with the focused expression of someone choosing her words very carefully and then deciding to say nothing, not yet. Carol's smile had become something structural, a thing maintained by effort rather than feeling. She turned back to Zara with the expression of someone making a final offer. "If you'll just come with me, we can look at all available seats in the forward section, and I'm sure we'll find something very comfortable." "No," Zara said. One word, quiet and absolute. Carol blinked. It was a small reaction, almost invisible, but it was there. Passengers in the 2 nearest rows registered it. "I'm going to need you to either ask this gentleman to vacate my seat or escalate this to your supervisor," Zara said. "Those are the 2 options I'm willing to discuss." The air in the cabin had changed. It was not loud, nobody was shouting, but something had shifted in the geometry of the situation, a weight distribution that several people in that forward section felt without being able to name it. The girl standing in the aisle was not backing down. She was not arguing. She was not asking. She was stating, with the precision of someone who had been taught the difference between those things, exactly what was going to happen next. Whitmore stared at her. His face was moving through something, a slow, ugly progression that began in contempt and was heading somewhere much worse. Dale Whitmore stood up. It was a deliberate act. He did not stand because he intended to move. He stood because he was 6'2" and 230 pounds, and he wanted Zara Coleman to feel that. He wanted the difference in their sizes to be part of the conversation. He wanted her to look up at him and understand, viscerally, that this was not a contest she could win. He underestimated her by an order of magnitude he could not yet fathom. "You know what your problem is?" he said, his voice rising out of its low register and filling the forward cabin with a clarity that removed any remaining possibility of nearby passengers pretending not to listen. "People like you have been handed so much for so long that you've forgotten what it means to actually earn your place somewhere. You think showing up with a printout entitles you to whatever you want." The words landed in the air and did not dissipate. They settled. "People like you." The older black man in row 4 closed his book, not slowly, the way you close a book when you've reached a stopping point. Quickly, the way you close something when the world outside it suddenly demands your full attention. Diane Wells set her glass on the tray table with a precision that suggested she no longer trusted herself to hold it. The young man behind Zara, who had been recording for the past 4 minutes with his phone held at chest height, adjusted his angle slightly without changing his expression. "What are you implying?" Diane said. Her voice was controlled, but just barely. Whitmore swung toward her. "Ma'am, this is a private matter. I'd appreciate it if you stayed out of it. It stopped being private the moment you said people like you to a 14-year-old child," Diane said. He turned back to Zara. His face had gone the deep, mottled red of a man who was no longer performing anger but actually feeling it, which made him significantly more dangerous and significantly less coherent. "This is affirmative action nonsense," he said. The words coming out clipped and hot. Someone gave this girl a ticket she didn't earn, and now she's standing here disrupting an entire flight because the system finally told her no. Carol, the flight attendant, had taken a half-step back. She was not intervening. She was waiting, in the way that people wait when they've made a calculation and decided that the cost of acting is higher than the cost of watching. Zara looked at Whitmore. She did not look frightened. She did not look angry. She looked, very precisely, like someone who was listening carefully and cataloguing everything. Her father had told her, when someone shows you their character, believe them, and then let them finish. "Sir," Carol finally said, her voice strained with the effort of maintaining a professional register. She turned to Zara. "I need you to choose. Either accept the accommodation we're offering, or I'm going to have to ask you to deplane. You're creating a disturbance." The cabin went absolutely silent, not the soft silence of people minding their own business. The rigid, held breath silence of people who have just witnessed something so wrong that speaking feels inadequate and staying quiet feels like complicity. The older man in row 4, who Zara did not know but who was watching her, with an expression that combined heartbreak and recognition, shook her head once, slowly. He had seen this before. He had been on the other side of it more than once, decades ago, in other rooms, other systems that bent toward the person who looked the part and away from the person who was right. Diane Wells was on her feet now. "Are you serious?" she said to Carol, her voice carrying the full weight of 72 years of watching things go wrong and being told to stay calm about it. He's the one who took her seat. He's the one who refused to show his ticket. He's the one using that language. "And you're threatening to remove her?" Carol's face flushed. "Ma'am, I need everyone to remain calm. I am calm," Diane said. "I am asking you calmly to do your job." Zara had not moved. She had listened to every word, absorbing it with the kind of attention that transforms raw information into something usable. Her father had told her, anger is fuel. Unrefined, it burns out fast and leaves nothing. Refined, it becomes something precise, something that lasts. She looked at Whitmore, then at Carol, then let her gaze move briefly over the faces of the passengers who were watching her. She saw anger on their behalf. She saw shame. She saw a few who looked away. And she saw what she needed to see, which was that every person in that cabin, regardless of where they stood, was watching. She reached into her bag. Not for her boarding pass this time, for her phone. It was not a standard device. It was matte black, slightly thicker than a consumer model, and it had no visible carrier logo. She held it in her hand for a moment without dialing, and in that pause something about her posture changed. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but the people who were paying close attention felt it, a shift, like a door opening inward. "I'm going to make a call," she said simply. She addressed no one in particular and everyone at once. "And after I do, this situation will be resolved. I'd encourage everyone to remain where they are." The phone rang once. One ring and then a click and then the kind of silence that means someone is already listening. Zara. The voice was immediate, focused, present in the way that a man is present, when he has trained himself never to be somewhere his mind is not. "What's wrong?" He had not said hello. He did not ask how the flight was going. He had heard something in the timing of the call, in the specific hour, and the fact that it was her and not a message, and he had gotten there before she said a word. "I'm on the plane," she said. Her voice was level, measured. She was standing in the aisle of a pressurized aluminum tube 6,000 feet below cruising altitude, surrounded by dozens of strangers, and her voice was exactly as steady as it always was. "We haven't pushed back yet. There's a situation I need your help with." Whitmore made a noise. It was the noise of a man who found the performance entertaining. He sat back down in the window seat, in Zara's seat, and crossed his arms with the settled satisfaction of someone watching a child try to bluff at poker. He had been in enough boardrooms to know theater when he saw it. "This was theater, tell me," Marcus Coleman said. Zara told him. She did it the way he had taught her, chronologically, factually, without embellishment. The booking confirmation, the seat, the man in the seat who had refused to move, refused to show his ticket, and made a series of comments about her race and her presumed economic status. The flight attendant who had sided with the man who was wrong threatened to remove the passenger who was right and offered as a solution a middle seat in row 6. She kept her voice at a volume appropriate to a conversation, not to a performance, but she was standing in a quiet cabin, and every word was audible to the nearest 2 rows in every direction. When she finished, her father was quiet for 3 seconds, not because he was uncertain, because he was thinking precisely. "What is the name of the man in your seat?" he asked. Zara looked at Whitmore. "Sir," she said. "My father would like your name." Whitmore's expression flickered. For the first time since Zara had arrived at her row, something shifted in his face that was not contempt or irritation. It was something more uncertain, not quite concern, but the early faint sensation of concern, the way the sky looks a certain way before a storm you did not expect. He recovered quickly. Men like Whitmore always recovered quickly. He had spent 3 decades being the most confident person in any room, and confidence was a habit more than a feeling. "Tell your father my name is Dale Whitmore," he said, loudly enough that the passenger who had been straining to hear did not have to strain any more. "Senior Vice President at Hargrove Capital. And while you're at it, tell him that if he wants to have a conversation about this, he can call our corporate offices during business hours." He paused for effect. "In the meantime, tell him to teach his daughter some manners." Zara repeated the name and company into the phone. The pause that followed was not long. Perhaps 5 seconds, but in those 5 seconds the temperature of the conversation, invisible to most of the people listening, changed. "I see," Marcus Coleman said. And then, after another beat, "Zara, would you put the phone on speaker, please?" She tapped the screen. The phone's speaker was excellent. The voice that came out of it was deep even, and carried with it the particular weight of a man who had learned, over 52 years, that volume was a weakness, and that the quietest voice in a room was often the most powerful. "Mr. Whitmore," Marcus Coleman said. The name landed differently when spoken by that voice. Not louder, heavier. Whitmore's jaw moved slightly. Something about the way the man on the phone said his name had cut through the performance and touched something more animal, more instinctive. The hair on the back of his neck registered what his conscious mind had not yet processed. This was not a bluff. "I'm going to ask you to listen very carefully to what I say next," Marcus Coleman continued. The voice was unhurried, entirely controlled, and it filled the forward cabin with the quiet authority of someone who had never needed to shout. "Because I am only going to say it once, and everything that happens in the next several minutes will follow from whether or not you actually hear me." Whitmore uncrossed his arms. It was a small movement, involuntary. Diane Wells had her hand pressed flat against the armrest of her seat as though bracing for impact. The young man with the recording phone had not moved. He was breathing shallowly, the way you breathe when you are very aware of your own breathing, and trying not to let it interfere with what is happening around you. The older man in row 4 had his hands folded in his lap and his eyes closed. Not because he was calm, because he had waited a very long time to hear something like this. "My daughter," Marcus Coleman said, "is standing in the aisle of your aircraft because you took her seat and refused to move. A member of your crew sided with you and threatened to remove a child who had done nothing wrong. And somewhere in the calculation of that decision, both of you looked at her and concluded that she was someone who could be pushed aside without consequences." His voice did not rise. It did not need to. "You made a mistake." Whitmore had made 30 years of career out of knowing when a room had turned. He had survived 2 recessions, 1 hostile takeover attempt, and a regulatory investigation that had ended careers on both sides of him. He was not, by most measures, a man who missed signals. He was missing this one completely. "Look," he said, his voice still carrying the habitual authority he had never had a real reason to question. "I don't know who you are, sir, and I don't particularly care. Your daughter wandered into first class on what appears to be a clerical error, and rather than handle it gracefully, you've decided to turn a minor inconvenience into some kind of spectacle." He waved a hand at the phone as though waving away something minor. "I'm a busy man. If you have a complaint, file it with the airline." The forward cabin exhaled softly, collectively. Several passengers looked at Whitmore, the way people look at a character in a film who has just made the decision that will destroy them. That specific, helpless foreknowledge of watching someone walk toward something they cannot see. Marcus Coleman did not respond immediately. When he spoke again, his voice carried the deliberate slowness of someone who wants each word to land completely before the next one arrives. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, "my name is Marcus Coleman. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Coleman Freight and Logistics." The name hit the cabin the way a name hits a room when people know it. Not everyone reacted simultaneously. It rippled outward from the people who recognized it fastest. A woman in the second row went very still. The young man with the phone made a sound so quiet it was almost not a sound. Diane Wells pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment, then lowered it. Whitmore's face had stopped moving. He had heard the name. Of course he had heard it. Hargrove Capital moved money through 17 industries, and logistics was one of them. Coleman Freight and Logistics was not a small company. It was not a regional carrier. It was an $18 billion global enterprise whose founder appeared on magazine covers and testified to Congress, and whose face, when Whitmore had seen it, he had admired in the particular way that men of a certain type admire self-made success in people who look like them, and resent it in people who don't. His face did not crumble. He was too experienced for that. But it changed. "I see you've made the connection," Marcus Coleman said. There was no satisfaction in his voice. Satisfaction was for people who needed vindication. He did not. My company is currently in advanced negotiations with Hargrove Capital for a $175 million freight partnership. We were scheduled to finalize terms within the next 2 weeks. I say were because I have just decided, while listening to you address my 14-year-old daughter, that those negotiations are concluded. Someone in the forward cabin drew a breath and did not let it out. Whitmore's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "Mr. Coleman!" And his voice had lost its structure, had become something rougher and much smaller. I had absolutely no idea who she was. "If I had known, I'm going to stop you there," Marcus Coleman said. "Because that is precisely the problem. You had no idea who she was, and that is why you treated her the way you did. You looked at a young black girl and concluded that she was nobody. That is not a mistake in judgment about this particular situation. That is a revelation of character. And a person of that character is not someone I want as a partner in any enterprise, regardless of the dollar amount." The silence in the cabin was total, not the silence of people not listening. The silence of people listening so hard they had forgotten to breathe. Whitmore's hands were on his knees. He was gripping his own trousers, a small involuntary gesture, the physical manifestation of a man trying to hold himself together with his hands because the rest of him was coming undone. Carol, the flight attendant, was standing at the edge of the forward section. Her face was pale, and her arms were at her sides, and she was very still in the way that people are still when they understand that movement will only make things worse. As for the flight attendant, Marcus Coleman continued, his voice unchanged. "I would like her name, please." Carol made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound of someone realizing, all at once, the full weight of a decision they had made 14 minutes ago. "I will be contacting this airline's senior leadership in the next 15 minutes, Marcus said. "I have their executive line. We have a prior relationship, and I will be having a conversation with them about what it means operationally and legally when a crew member actively sides with a passenger who is violating federal non-discrimination statutes and threatens to remove the victim of that violation." He paused. "But first," he said, "I am going to ask you to do something, Mr. Whitmore. I am going to ask you to get out of my daughter's seat, and I want every person on that aircraft to watch you do it." Dale Whitmore did not get out of the seat, not immediately. He sat there for a moment, and the moment stretched into something that felt much longer than it was, the way moments do when a room is watching a man work out whether he still has any moves left. He did not. He began to speak. He said something about a misunderstanding, something about not having full information, something about the pressures of his schedule that morning, and how he had not slept well, as though fatigue were a mitigating circumstance for racial contempt. Every word landed worse than the one before it. The passengers who had been uncertain about where their sympathies lay were no longer uncertain. "Mr. Whitmore," Marcus Coleman said, cutting through the explanation with the same clean precision he had used throughout. "I'm going to put you on hold for 1 moment." The phone made a soft tone. Zara held it at her side and waited, and the cabin waited with her. Whitmore sat in the window seat with his briefcase closed in his lap, and his financial newspaper folded on the tray table, and an expression on his face that had passed through arrogance and contempt and panic, and was now settling into something more fundamental. Something he had perhaps not felt since he was very young, when the world was not yet organized in his favor and consequences still landed where they were supposed to land. The phone tone changed. "Captain Bowen." Marcus Coleman's voice returned, and with it a new quality, something more formal, more deliberate. He was not talking to Whitmore now. "This is Marcus Coleman. I'm on the phone with my daughter, who is a passenger in your forward cabin. She is standing in the aisle because a passenger has taken her seat and a crew member has failed to correct the situation. I need you to return to the gate." A different voice. Measured, professional, the voice of someone accustomed to situations that required clear decisions quickly. "Mr. Coleman, this is Captain Bowen. We're currently second in the departure queue. Can you confirm we're dealing with a safety issue? We are dealing with a passenger who has racially harassed a minor and a crew member who threatened to remove the victim instead of the aggressor," Marcus Coleman said. "Under FAA regulations, both of those conditions constitute a safety concern. I am formally requesting that this aircraft return to the gate so that the appropriate parties can be removed before we depart." The intercom clicked, and then the voice of Captain Bowen, now slightly distorted through the plane's own speaker system, addressed the entire aircraft. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We're going to return to the gate to address a passenger situation. We apologize for the delay and appreciate your patience." The low hum of the engines shifted. The aircraft, which had been moving forward with the slow, purposeful momentum of a machine committed to its trajectory, began to turn. The turn was gradual. It was the kind of movement that does not look dramatic from inside the cabin, just a slight shift in the angle of the light through the windows, a gentle lean. But every person in the forward section understood exactly what it meant. The plane was not taking off. The plane was going back. Whitmore was crying. It had come on without announcement, not with heaving or noise, but with the wet, involuntary quality of tears that arrive because the body has run out of other options. He was sitting in the window seat with his briefcase on his lap, and his face red and his eyes bright with tears he was not able to stop. And the tears were not for Zara Coleman, they were for Dale Whitmore. The job he had held for 17 years and had just lost. For the partnership he would be blamed for destroying. For the reputation he had spent 3 decades building and had now, in the span of 20 minutes, burned entirely to the ground. Through the window, the flashing lights of airport security vehicles appeared at the gate ahead of them. They had arrived already. Marcus Coleman had arranged that before he returned to the call, Carol was standing with her back against the partition, her face ashen, her arms crossed over her chest in the posture of someone who is trying to make themselves smaller and failing. The phone in her pocket had been buzzing. She had not looked at it. The young man who had been recording set his phone down on the tray table and took a long breath. He had over 12 minutes of footage. He had already sent clips to 2 recipients from whom he had not heard back yet, but he would, and soon. Diane Wells looked at Zara. Zara was standing in the aisle exactly where she had been standing for the last 30 minutes. Her posture had not changed. Her expression had not changed. She was watching everything with the quiet, comprehensive attention of someone who had been taught to witness carefully and remember accurately. Marcus Coleman's voice came back through the phone, no longer on speaker now, addressed only to his daughter. "Zara," he said. "I'm here," she said. "Are you all right?" She thought about the question. It was a real question. He had never been in the habit of asking it rhetorically. "Yes," she said, "I'm fine." "Good," he said. "Stay where you are. The right people are coming." The aircraft reached the gate and stopped with a soft final hydraulic sigh. The jet bridge attached. The forward door opened, and then they came in. 2 Port Authority officers first, their uniforms dark and their expressions set in the neutral, practiced focus of people trained to walk into difficult situations without broadcasting what they already know. Behind them, 2 men in suits who were not airline employees, their credentials visible on lanyards around their necks, FBI field office identifications. Bringing up the rear, a woman and a man in business attire with airline badges, their faces carrying the particular pallor of senior executives who have been roused from their offices and told that their company is currently trending on social media for a reason that is not good. The lead Port Authority officer, whose name tag read Miller, moved down the aisle of the forward cabin with the kind of authority that fills a space without demanding it. His eyes swept the seats once, professionally, and found Whitmore. He had already seen the footage. It had been transmitted to the field office from 3 separate devices before the aircraft had finished taxiing back to the gate. "Mr. Dale Whitmore," Miller said. Whitmore looked up from his lap. His face was wrecked. The tears had dried, leaving the skin tight and mottled, and his eyes were the eyes of a man who has arrived somewhere he had never once, in 30 years, imagined he might end up. "Yes," he said, and the word had almost no weight to it. "I need you to gather your personal items and come with us," Miller said. His voice was even, without judgment or satisfaction. This was not personal. It was procedural, which was, in some ways, worse. One of the FBI agents stepped forward. He was younger than Miller, mid-30s, with the careful, methodical quality of someone who chose his words the way a surgeon chooses instruments. "Mr. Whitmore, I am Special Agent Torres." FBI Civil Rights Division. Based on footage already provided to our field office, we are opening a preliminary investigation under Title 49 of the United States Code, which prohibits discrimination by air carriers and on commercial aircraft. Your voluntary cooperation at this stage is strongly advised. The word investigation passed through the forward cabin like a current. Several passengers shifted. The older man in row 4, who had not moved since he closed his book, bowed his head slightly. Whitmore gathered his briefcase with hands that were not entirely steady. He stood. He was still a large man, still physically imposing, but the size meant nothing now. Whatever architecture of confidence had made him feel entitled to this seat, to this confrontation, to this entire performance of authority and contempt, had come apart completely. He was just a man in a suit who had made a decision and was now carrying it toward the door. He passed Zara in the aisle. He did not look at her. She looked at him, not with triumph and not with pity, with the steady, clear-eyed attention of someone who wants to remember correctly. The airline executive, the woman, stepped forward as Whitmore was guided toward the jet bridge. She addressed the forward cabin, her voice controlled but not entirely composed. On behalf of this airline, I want to offer our most sincere and unqualified apology to Ms. Zara Coleman. What she experienced today in our forward cabin is unacceptable under any standard, professional, ethical, or human. It does not reflect who we want to be, and I am deeply sorry that it happened here. She looked at Zara when she said it. Not at the cameras, of which there were many, at Zara. Then the male executive, the one from Human Resources, turned to Carol. She was still at the partition. She had not moved, had not spoken, had not tried to explain herself, since Marcus Coleman had identified what she had done in terms that left very little room for reinterpretation. "Miss Simmons," he said, his voice low, "your conduct today constituted a failure of your professional obligations and a violation of our non-discrimination policy. You are suspended effective immediately, pending a full investigation. I need your crew badge." Carol's hand went to her badge. She unclipped it. She handed it to him. Her face was very still, the stillness of someone in shock, not the quiet kind of shock, but the kind that arrives when you understand all at once that the story you told yourself about who you were has just been revised by your own actions. She was escorted off the aircraft by the second Port Authority officer. Marcus Coleman's voice came through the phone, amplified now so that the forward cabin could hear him. He had asked Zara to put it on speaker again. His voice filled the space with the weight of a man who had earned the right to say what he was about to say. "I want to say something to everyone still on this aircraft," he said, not as Zara's father. "As someone who has lived in this country for 52 years and who knows what it costs, every single day, to be black in a space where someone has decided, without evidence, without conversation, without any information at all, that you don't belong." The cabin was very quiet. "What my daughter did today took something most adults don't have," he said. She did not run. She did not argue. She did not allow someone else's contempt to become her shame. She stood in that aisle with a boarding pass that said exactly what it said, and she waited for the truth to arrive. That's it. That's what she did. And it worked because this time, finally, the truth had someone standing behind it. He paused. "Please," he said, "bear witness to what you saw today. Not to me, not to Hargrove Capital or Coleman Freight or any of the rest of it. Bear witness to the fact that a 14-year-old girl stood alone in an aisle for 30 minutes against 2 adults, who told her she was wrong, and she did not move. From somewhere near the front of the cabin, a woman began to clap. It was a single pair of hands, tentative at first, and then more certain. And then another passenger joined, and another, until the sound of it was continuous and filling, not triumphant and noisy, but sustained and genuine, the sound of people who had been witnesses to something and needed a way to say so. Zara Coleman stood in the aisle and let it wash over her, and her face did not change, and her posture did not change, and when the sound finally faded, she looked at the empty window seat and took a breath and walked toward it. The aircraft sat at the gate for another 18 minutes. In that time, Agent Torres and his colleague completed their preliminary documentation, collecting contact information from 11 passengers who had offered to provide witness statements. 3 of them had footage with clear audio. The young man who had been recording since the beginning had 12.5 minutes of continuous video with no gaps and excellent sound quality. He transferred the full file before the aircraft pushed back again. The airline executive, the woman, moved through the forward cabin individually. She spoke to Diane Wells, who accepted the conversation with the quiet, slightly exhausted grace of someone who had been angry and was now simply tired. She spoke to the older man in row 4, who looked at her for a moment before answering, and what he said was short, and the executive listened to all of it. She did not promise him anything other than that she had heard him. He seemed to consider that sufficient. She came to Zara last. Zara had taken her seat. She was sitting in the window seat, seat 2A, with her bag stowed above her, and her seatbelt already buckled. Her posture, the same unhurried, settled posture she had carried with her down the jet bridge nearly an hour ago. The seat was everything she had expected. The light from the window came in at an angle she had wanted. She had a book in her bag that she still intended to finish. "Miss Coleman," the executive said, crouching slightly to bring herself level, professional but genuine, the posture of someone trying to communicate sincerity without performing it. "I want you to know that what happened today is going to be examined at every level of our organization. We are not going to treat this as an isolated incident. We are going to ask the hard questions about how it was able to happen and what structural changes are necessary to prevent it from happening again." Zara looked at her. "Thank you," she said. The executive hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes. How did you do that? Stay that calm for that long?" She wasn't asking for company talking points. She was asking because she genuinely wanted to know. Zara considered the question seriously, the way her father had taught her to consider questions that deserved a real answer. "My father taught me that the moment you react emotionally to someone who is trying to provoke you, you give them the frame," she said. "They get to decide what the situation is about. If you stay calm, the situation stays about the facts, and in this case, the facts were on my side." The executive nodded slowly. Then she stood and extended her hand, and Zara shook it, and the executive walked back toward the forward section to complete her remaining conversations. In the departure lounge, visible through the window, Dale Whitmore was seated between 2 Port Authority officers on a row of plastic chairs. His briefcase was on the floor beside him. His financial newspaper was still rolled under his arm. He was looking at the floor. His phone was in his pocket, unanswered. He had received 4 calls in the last 12 minutes from a number with a Midtown Manhattan area code. He had not picked up any of them. He'd already knew what they were about. At Hargrove Capital's headquarters, 19 floors above 6th Avenue, a senior partner was on the phone with the firm's general counsel. The conversation was not going well for anyone involved. The video, now circulating on 3 major platforms, had been viewed by more than 8 million people in the 2 hours since it was first posted. The comments were not good. The trending hashtag was not good. The calls from journalists were not good. The conversation with Coleman Freight's legal team, which had just concluded, had been particularly not good. None of this was visible from seat 2A, but Zara knew it was happening. She had seen the shape of consequences like these before, in conversations she had listened to from the edge of her father's boardroom. She understood how power worked when it moved correctly, how it created pressure at the point where correction was needed without requiring anyone to raise their voice or make a threat that was not already inside the facts. Captain Bowen's voice came over the intercom. His tone had changed from the professional neutrality of a routine announcement to something slightly warmer, more personal. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your extraordinary patience today. The matter that required our return to the gate has been fully resolved. On behalf of the entire crew, I want to extend our sincere apologies for the delay and for the experience that made it necessary. We'll be pushing back shortly for our flight to London, and to the passenger in seat 2A, he paused briefly. We are glad you're with us today. Have a wonderful flight." It was a small thing, a few words on a speaker system, but in the particular context of this particular morning, it landed with more weight than a small thing usually does. The older man in row 4, who had reopened his book but not been reading it, turned toward the window. He did not look at Zara. He didn't need to. He had watched everything, and he had his own reasons for feeling something about how it had ended. reasons that went back much further than this morning and reached into parts of his life that no one on this aircraft knew about. He was glad she had not moved. He was glad they had all been here to see it. The engines began their low, measured build-up. The aircraft started to move, slowly, deliberately, back toward the departure queue. The sky outside was the particular shade of clear morning blue that means the weather is good all the way to the Atlantic. Zara opened her book. Flight 212 to London lifted off from John F. Kennedy at 11:23 in the morning, 1 hour and 38 minutes behind schedule. The sky beyond the window was enormous and clean. The coastline appeared below, that particular geometry of harbour and bridge and borough, visible only from altitude, and then the city gave way to the silver expanse of the Atlantic, and the aircraft settled into its cruising altitude, and the light inside the cabin became the deep, even gold of morning above the clouds. Zara Coleman had read 40 pages of her book by the time her phone buzzed. She had expected the call. She answered on the second ring. "We're at altitude," she said. "I know," her father said. She could hear in his voice that he had been watching the flight tracker. He tracked every flight she took. She had known this since she was 9 and asked him about it directly, and he had answered directly, the way he always did. "I wanted to give you a few minutes to breathe before I called." "I don't need a few minutes," she said. "I'm fine." "I know you're fine," he said. "That was never in question." A pause. "I meant I needed a few minutes." She was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the Atlantic below, the vast grey-blue expanse of it, the size of the world made plain. "How bad was it?" she asked. She meant Hargrove Capital. She meant the contract. She meant the full shape of what had been set in motion. "It's manageable," he said. That meant it was significant but not fatal. Her father did not describe things as manageable when they were small. He described them as manageable when they required real work to handle. Their general counsel reached out within the hour. Their CEO called at 10:45. "They're in damage control. Are you going to work with them again?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of uncertainty, the silence of precision. "Not under the current leadership," he said. "Which will almost certainly change in the next few weeks. We'll see." She nodded, though he couldn't see her. She had learned nodding from him, as a way of acknowledging things that didn't require a verbal response. "Zara," he said. His voice had changed, the professional register dropping entirely, becoming something quieter and less managed. "I need to tell you something." "All right," she said. "I've been in rooms where people looked at me the way that man looked at you today," he said. "I've been in rooms where the people who were supposed to be neutral sided with the other person the way that flight attendant did. I've handled it differently at different points in my life. Early on, not always well. There were times I was too quiet and times I was too loud and times I chose entirely wrong battles." He paused. "You handled it exactly right. Not because of what happened at the end, before the end. Those 30 minutes before I was involved." That was you. Zara was looking out the window. The cloud cover below was solid white, a second floor to the world, and above it the sky was a shade of blue that didn't have a name in any language she spoke. "You taught me how," she said. "I gave you the information," he said. "You did the harder part." There was a sound in the background on his end, voices, someone asking him a question. He covered the phone and answered briefly and then returned. "I have to go. There are approximately 11 conversations I need to have in the next 3 hours." "I know," she said. "I'm proud of you, Zara." She had heard those words many times. They had never felt routine. "I'll call when I land," she said. The call ended, and she set the phone on the tray table and looked out the window for a long moment. Behind her, the forward cabin had returned to the quiet, contained world of a long-haul flight. Drinks were being served. Someone a few rows back was already asleep. Diane Wells was working on a laptop, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. The older man in row 4 was listening to something through headphones and looking at the sky with an expression that was at peace without being simple. The story of Flight 212 spread faster than the flight itself. By the time the aircraft crossed the halfway point over the Atlantic, the footage had been seen on every major platform by a combined audience that would eventually exceed 50 million people. The hashtag was not a hashtag anymore. It was a reference point. It was the kind of story that anchors a moment in the public memory. not because the events were extraordinary in the history of racial injustice, but because of the particular, precise dignity with which the girl at the center of it had refused to become something smaller than she was. Dale Whitmore resigned from Hargrove Capital 4 days later, before the firm could announce the findings of the investigation. The statement released on his behalf used the word regret 7 times. It did not use the word sorry once. Carol Simmons's suspension became a termination after the airline's internal review concluded that her actions had constituted discriminatory treatment under company policy. She appealed the decision twice. Both appeals were denied. Zara Coleman arrived at London Heathrow at 11:47 local time the following morning. She cleared customs, collected her bag, and took a car to the university campus, where she would spend the next 3 months attending the accelerated program she had worked for 2 years to earn a place in. She sent her father a word message when she arrived. Landed. Fine, he sent back a single word. Good. She sat down at the desk in her small campus room, opened laptop, and began to read the materials for her first class on Monday. Outside the window, London was grey and wet and entirely itself, and she was exactly where she was supposed to be, in a room she had earned, doing work she had chosen, without apology to anyone. She had not moved from the aisle until the seat was returned to her. She would not remember it as the day her father's power saved her. She would remember it as the day she found out how long she could stand still, while the world arranged itself around what was right. If this story of quiet strength and real accountability stayed with you, subscribe to this channel and turn on your notifications. And in the comments below, tell me this. Have you ever had to stand your ground for something you knew was right, even when everyone around you told you to step aside? Tell me what happened. Tell me what you did. We want to hear every word.